Welcome to the Brain Behaviour Business podcast, brought to you by PRISM Brain Mapping, the online behavioural profiling tool.
Hello and welcome to our PRISM podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Susie Guthrie of 42 Think, and today we are focusing on the topic of shaping culture. So good afternoon, Susie.
Good afternoon. How are you, Alex?
I'm very well, thank you. And you?
Good, I'm great. Thank you.
Good. Before we start, I have to say I'm really interested in your company name, 42 Think. Where does that come from?
Thank you. It is a bit different. Let me share with you the reason behind. I've been involved in consultancy for 20 years and recently rebranded 42 Think a few years ago. And where it came from, there's a US social study. And I was reading through this, and it was based on the relationship between employees and their managers. And because that's the area we focus on, and managers and leaders. And in this study, one of the questions was, in the past 12 months, have you withheld either an idea or a problem from your direct line manager? And if so, why? And it was a great question, and particularly the why, not just the numbers. And what jumped out with me was 42% of people withheld an idea or a problem from their manager because they think there's no point in sharing it.
Good grief.
Because I know 42%, so that's almost half of the people, and the reasons they gave were either because there'll be some sort of personal retribution, or there's no point because nothing will happen.
And
that's
quite shocking, isn't it?
It really is. Because you think that could be your next great idea, or the wheel about to fall off. And nope, there's no point in sharing. So I kind of made it my mission, which has become our mission, to break that down. And of course, the leaders have got a big part to play in getting over organizational silence and creating psychological safety. But also individuals need to come out from behind themselves. And even if they don't think something's going to happen, find a way somehow, if they can, to be able to share these things, because they're often the ones with the knowledge and the ideas. So that's its origin.
That's great. And presumably I'm not the first person to ask that question, am I?
You're not. There's actually a little bit on the website, and there's somebody that said, a few people say, is that the answer to life, the universe and everything, which I think is an old reference, but and it's not. But yeah, that's its origin. It is a little curious, but it's fun as well.
That's excellent. Really good. So the main focus that you have as a consultancy is around shaping culture. Would that be fair?
Yeah, shaping culture, and particularly working with leaders at all level in organizations, and also teams. So senior teams, particularly because they have a big role to play, or functional or cross-functional teams.
Right. Okay. So talk to me a little bit about shaping culture. In the old days, I guess we called that culture change, shaping culture change. So why is that so key? Why is it so important in the world we live in today?
Well, I think things have changed in all industries in the past couple of years, particularly post-COVID, and not just because of the lockdown. And I think the way business is accelerating. Work used to be somewhere that people would go. Now it's something that you do. And we've accelerated how we work, the ways of working. Some people believe by about 10 years, and perhaps the culture, the way that we work, what's important in our guide rails, hasn't always caught up with that. So this is about not necessarily what we do, but how we do it, and very specifically the behaviors, the way we work together. And that has changed. And it's important that clients, even if they're doing the same thing and they haven't changed in their offering and their people much, how they do it really needs to align and reflect that.
Okay, so why does it need to? What are the benefits of shaping culture? What are the benefits of having the right culture?
Yeah, I think there are a number of benefits depending on the organization. And perhaps if I can give you a couple of examples. One, we work with a number of fast growing organizations that maybe has had some private equity investment, and they're busy looking at what would make us an employer of choice. What's our employee brand? What do we want to stand for as we're growing and in the next 1, 2, 3 years. So for them, that's what they need to focus on, is creating a brand, and what do they stand for internally and externally. So that's one, if they're on their growth and shaping path. For established organizations, I think a challenge for established organizations, in fact organizations in general, is attracting and retaining people. And what got you here may not get you where you need to be or sustain you, particularly for, as well as working in the UK, we work internationally, so in EMEA with some global organizations, and in any industry, whether it be engineering, B2B, etc., services, attracting people is really important, but making them stay, the way you do that is to make sure that you're really clear about what to expect, not just terms and conditions and remuneration and the role, but what it's like to work here, what's important to us and what's important to you, because then you get the best fit, attraction and fit of employees, and those people who stick around are the ones that understand and choose to operate within that culture. And because the world of work and our environment has changed so much, it's really key to every so often hold a mirror up and just check. And the way that we can tell it's not working is often by some of those numbers, those people metrics around attrition. It could be absence, it could be great place to work, engagement surveys. There's so much information out there, let alone just attracting, retaining people, that can help us understand maybe we need to look at this because we need to move the dials.
I'm intrigued by great place to work, because for me that sounds quite a blue prism way of putting things, if you like. So, a supportive environment, an environment where people care. So does that mean if it's a great place to work, it's not necessarily a challenging environment?
It's there are a number of metrics in there. Many organizations use that as a benchmark internally and externally as well. For me, it's good if there are other metrics that people use, because while engaging people, giving them a purpose and developing them is important, I believe that people thrive and develop most when they're challenged and supported in equal measure. Now, people come to work for different reasons, but if you understand what's important to an individual, where they are in their career or work life, then, and you can in some way meet that, then that's brilliant. It relies on more than just a great place to work survey. There are of course internal metrics, but understanding about an individual, what makes them tick, and some of the behaviors that you want to encourage in an organization.
Okay. So let's look at then how you shape culture. So what are the steps that you help companies take? What are the steps that companies perhaps could take on their own? How do you actually make this sort of culture that you want? How do you achieve that?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of an exam question, because there are so many features on that. But it's changed. That's what I find quite interesting, Alex, is because it used to be that we would engage with a client. They've perhaps gone on a values refresh. They're going on a program of transformation, and they've come up with a set of values. They want us to help them translate that into behaviors and maybe examples, good examples, and also examples of unhelpful behaviors or from to behaviors. Then there are frameworks, and that's embedded, and it's socialized. And so it's a classic trickle down from the senior team. Recently, we've seen a different approach, and it's more holistic, it's more organic, and frankly, I think it's more fitting for the world of work and recognizing that one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
So I would say that the main components are, if you think about this in terms of the employee life cycle, perhaps I can give you some examples of how we've been helping clients. First of all, you've got to have some guide rails and pegs on the ground, whether that be a behavior framework, some values, but something that is relevant and valid, doesn't have to be specific, but helps you to understand what you want to stand for, what's important in terms of not what you deliver, but how you work together. Once you've got that, you can think about, well, how do we bring it to life? And we have got expertise not just in learning and development, but in organizational development. So helping to bridge that gap of, we have this kind of nebulous list of values on the wall, and it makes a clever acronym, and I can remember it, but it says something like fresh, but hang on a sec, what is it? But actually, so that people live and breathe it every day. That's my dream, so that someone can't remember the values, but they absolutely live and breathe and support and challenge people around it. So that makes sense that you find ways at different points in the employee life cycle. And this is some of the ways that we can support this, because of course a lot of this can be done internally. Is an example recently is we've worked with a couple of different organizations at different stages in their life cycle. So a couple where they are growing organizations, they've just had investment, they want to grow to the next level. Part of that, they need to build their senior team, not just the senior team for where they are now, but where they need to be in terms of growth. So this is where PRISM comes in. So we would look at the existing team, use the PRISM profile, explore that as part of the team, but also, of course, give them some feedback so they understand the model. Then we see, well, where do you want to be? What about the culture and values you want to shape? And we, for use an example, is an FD, finance director, and we've done this for a couple of clients recently, also for technical expertise as well, because you can tick on the experience, you can tick on the qualification, but if you want an FD who is absolutely able to work in an agile way, able to change things, to be quite savvy, work and influence beyond authority with the investors, manage things at the board meeting, steer things. That's very different from if you've got someone that's accountable for a country in EMEA, who needs to steady the ship, who needs to report to a HQ in the States, and just make sure that they go rigorously through the process and make sure that it's delivered on time and with big numbers and dependencies and high risk. They're very different characters, and different people would thrive behaviorally based on their preferences in different organizations. So it's our job to help understand what they need, map that across in different ways. Then when we profile, typically we profile before the end stage clients that we work with, to get under the skin, understand what they need, and then we in addition to their other methods of recruitment and different insights they get, we help to add PRISM and say, okay, this is what it tells us, this is what they could add both to the role and also to the senior team and the organization, so that they perhaps get on with their peers, but there's not going to be that group think where everyone thinks, yes, this is brilliant because it's all gold blue and we all agree, but we kick the can down the road and we don't challenge, what's going on behind the scenes. So that's one example. Another one is working with an existing, whether it be cross-functional senior team or a senior team beyond boundaries, so within beyond regions, helping them to do exactly the same, so understand their own behaviors. And I think there's something so empowering about someone really understanding themselves, because for me, leadership team development, it should be from the basis of understanding and really using the people's behaviors and skills in the room beyond their technical hat or their experience. So we're doing that with PRISM, typically with PRISM Professional at that level, and offer them support and coaching as well. But the other thing that we're using is helping them with using the team diagnostic. So exploring that balance between how we work together, how we communicate, how we operate as a team, but also how we deliver results. And it's our job behind the scenes, but then to work with them to say, well, how are you doing in relation to where you want to be? So that culture you want, and work with them. So it's never a one-off. It sounds a bit weird to say, well, we don't work with a client who wants to do it once, because for us, it's not a benchmark. These tools are about helping people to get to where they want to be and measuring them along the way and supporting them. So we would work with them once. I work with them to create some actions, maybe some interventions, and then measure it again, perhaps in 6 months' time. So those are examples of ways that we've done that. So both at the beginning, attracting and getting the right people behavior wise, and then whether it be with senior teams, and of course, I know you're covering elsewhere, but leadership and management development, helping to understand the people that you've got, because focusing on specific employee behaviors can really drive tangible organization change as much as the numbers and the metrics. So this focus on behavior is so important for shaping culture.
So what happens, Susie, when you raise awareness of behavior with someone who produces fantastic results? They become aware that perhaps the way they're producing results isn't necessarily in line with the culture that the organization wants. They show a reluctance to change, possibly because for them the results are key. How do you overcome those sorts of challenges?
And that's interesting, because my view is we want to support and enable HR and people teams and senior leaders, managers as much as possible. But ultimately, if there's a behavioral change or a cultural realignment, it's a hill for climbers. Sometimes there are some people that don't feel that they would fit or don't necessarily get there. And actually, tough as it is, that's okay. It might be that they need some support readjusting, and maybe once they've gone through all of those supports, and I'm a massive believer in that we support people in that they realize that it's not where they want to be. But there are lots of things that leaders can do to, particularly if you help someone identify their own preferences, their blockers, enablers and superpowers, and see how they can fit in and what they need to do to help them through change. And a lot of the work we do is with leaders and teams. It's helping them to understand change, and it's not the change or the new system or the process that gets you, of course, it's the psychological orientation. But I think helping people to understand themselves, and often letting go of stuff, is the first sort of change. That is letting go of things and helping them to do that. So we help leaders to help people to do this, but the starting point is being aware of it, and then you empower people so that they can perhaps take some ownership in that.
I'm getting a real sense that raising awareness of behavior is absolutely key, both for leaders, for the teams themselves. And I guess the next stage then is how you generate responsibility in those individuals and in the teams to want to embrace the change and of course make it happen. So what tips do you have to enable that to work? So having raised awareness, how do you then get them excited and passionate about wanting to make the change?
I mean that's a really good point, and some of it is in the communication, some of it is understanding what's important to people, or if not, using the PRISM model or using some other tools, understanding generally the kind of things that most people want and communicating to that, instead of talking about this is where the business needs to be, the messaging needs to be right. The other thing, to make sure nothing policy or procedurally gets in the way. So a great example is many clients have, for example, collaboration as a value, which is very important, particularly if you translate that into behavior, so people understand what that is. If you've got a reward policy that perhaps rewards people based on individual goals or individual objectives, that kind of bumps up against some of the things that you want to do. A sense check, and that's a whole other podcast topic, sense check on some of those things that might get in the way. And we often work with people and maybe point things out because you've got a fresh lens on that. But to answer your question about how to get people excited, some of the organizations that we've seen the best culture change, and they tend to be a bit bigger, so number wise 250 plus, is where individual leaders get together almost like instead of a culture, it's a climate. So within the guide rails and where we're going as an organization, work with their people in their expertise, and they understand them because they're very close to them, and they help to figure out, well, what are within these guide rails, what are our non-negotiables? How are we going to work together? What do we stand for? And engage them in that process, so that whole sense making, and then maybe come up with their own little guide rails or code, and use that day to day, not just something that's on the wall. So what does this mean if we say, for example, be brave? Own things. What does that mean if you're at a cross-functional meeting, or you're working with a client? And then get them to jointly hold each other's feet to the fire. So it shouldn't necessarily always be the leader, though typically at first it is, because they've got to lead by example. But get everybody to have a say, to take part in it, and to help them, get some purpose, but also to see that they've got a voice that's heard. That circles us right back to organizational silence, engaging people, and giving people giving them that psychological safety. And genuinely, when you ask people for their opinion and what they think and what's up for grabs, really listen to it, not just say, oh right, well, I've engaged you, but we're going to do this anyway, which is not good leadership practice. But definitely get them involved and get some clarity, and focus on not just the change in the numbers, but the transition and the how, so the behavior side of things.
I want to go back a bit in terms of the organization understanding what culture it wants and needs.
Yeah.
So how does an organization begin to understand that? What steps do they take to really understand what culture it is they want before they start to make the changes?
I think often, again, there's a lot involved in that, and some clients get tied up in what they're like culturally in the marketplace, and so their clients. There needs to be a tie into that, but it's more about what kind of workplace, work experience, how will we do things to deliver what we're brilliant at, to grow. So from our point of view, we would find out what is your strategy and your goals, where are you in the marketplace, what do you stand for, who are your demographics and target audience. And while we're not a marketing consultant, we want to be able to understand, who do you do this for, what is your purpose, and what are you passionate about? Because if you can help to ignite or draw people in that share those, and then there's a process that we go through. Most organizations that we work through already have a set of values or something to work with, even if they're a little bit outdated, and they can be dusted down, realigned, focused on. Often the missing link is translating it into behaviors and giving leaders, managers, opportunity to work with others to bring it to life. For me, that's often the missing gap. They've got their values or what they stand for. It's all in their annual reports. They've got a strategy, but actually it's about, how are we measuring whether people are doing this? How are we measuring whether it's important? And some clients are very good at completing pulse surveys, checking these things, and we'd absolutely recommend that. It doesn't have to be. Again, we're moving away from, every 2 years we do an employee survey and everyone does it, and then we take 2 months to translate it, and then we present it at an all staff meeting, and then we do another one in 2 years. And
we sort of miss a step there, really, in terms of what we need to do about it.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's my thing. I'm a big pragmatist, and I think much better to do smaller surveys, to maybe own them at a smaller level, or break down, obviously protecting psychological safety, and doing it in bigger chunks so it can remain anonymous, but saying, right, what can we do with this? You said we did. So a bit like when we use the team diagnostic, and when we use any of the other PRISM tools, then we say, right, well, that gives us some information as a basis to move, as a basis to do something, as a basis to have a conversation, and then we'll do it again, or then we'll review it. So I think the organizations that are saying, right, this is what we stand for, what does it mean, and how do we measure it? That's a starting point. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be thought out. For me, the more you can engage people, the better. So I would say, that's why we used to get involved in that work, but now if we do, it's more rolling our sleeves up, an extra pair of hands, and helping to steer the process internally so that the client owns it. Because when people own it, they feel much more likely to take part of it, take pride in it. And I just think get the boat moving, then steer it. So get something going and then see how people are going to use it. It reminds me of something completely different, but this is something I saw in architecture. We've done some work recently with a global architect firm and shaping their next leaders and looking at culture with their senior team. And a project within the architectural sphere, they'd done some landscaping in a brand new project and they needed to build a path. And the path was into town, and that was the last thing they wanted to do. And the local authority wanted to sign it off and say, just build the path. This is the design. And they said, no, we want to see where people walk, and then we'll build the path.
Okay.
So frustrated. And actually, where they'd originally said where logically it should be, that wasn't where people walked. And we see this all the time, is that you plan for one thing, but actually how people use things in reality can be very different. And it's exactly the same with values, results, behavior frameworks, all of these sorts of things. Get something moving, see how people use it, say to them, what else do you want? Well, actually, I'd love if we have an online review system or coffee chat every month, I'd love to have these highlighted on here. Or I think it would be great to have a feedback system because someone from that other team over there demonstrated this brilliantly. I've told them, but they're not going to tell anybody. How can I do that? So get your pegs in the ground and something moving, and then engage people in how can we make this better for you? How can you really want to use this?
And I guess the theme I'm hearing as you talk through various examples is that the organic growth is absolutely key. So it's one thing having a top-down approach where you have vision and values on every flip chart possible in every room, but it's another thing actually having this organic growth that's just across the organization. I guess the danger is with organic growth that it's not necessarily growing in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think what I might say to question that is what is right and who's to say it's right. And for me, in where this works well is in larger organizations, global, that are different territories, where you also take in the regional cultures and nuances within that. And one example is we work with a global heavy engineering firm, and they have got their EMEA managers together, and we're working with them. Now, there are a whole bunch of guide rails about globally how we work together, but actually they recognize that they wanted to almost take that a stage further. Now, it's very important as we work with them, and it's important that we work under the umbrella of those global guide rails. And then what I do is almost say, right, so we're going to create a climate. So this is what we're talking about. Which of those works? How can we take the meaning of that and make it very specific to what works? For example, what might work in the Netherlands for one particular group might not work exactly the same in Belgium or Switzerland, but we can work under the same culture, but the local climate. Let's figure out something for our expertise, how we need to communicate, how we bring it to life. So it's our job to make sure that it's in line with that, but you can have some local ownership within that. We've got to be careful and ask some questions around, right, we don't want a whole bunch of mavericks, because that wouldn't do our business or their business any good. But how can you own this within the spirit of what the organization is trying to achieve? Because if you get that right, and if we help them get that right, but they own it and they grow it. Funny enough, I've just had an example drop in my inbox today with one client we're working with last September, and then again after they shaped their team a couple of months ago, and they've come up with a range of just behaviors in their own words, which is very different to the corporate ones, but they absolutely in the spirit of it, and they've shaped them up, and they're just going to have them because they own them, the 12 people in there, 12 managers, leaders, and they said, this is what's important to us, this will get us to the quite challenging marketplace and targets and way we want to work. And it's creating some quite interesting and positive vibes in the organization. So people are saying, do you know what, anytime I have a meeting with you guys, it's always great fun, but you're prepared and you're laser focused. And sometimes you call me out on stuff, but actually I quite like that because I know where I stand. What are you doing? How do you do it? So instead of the top down, yes, I've got to go to the cultures meeting in an hour and on a post-it wall, it's actually creating this energy and excitement around, well, what are you doing? And maybe we might like some of this, or I like that, we'll take that on board. So it's almost like Trojan mice, and I get quite excited by that because people are owning it and changing things from within as well as some of the big change.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple of last questions really before we finish off. The first is the balance between delivering results and operating in behaviors that fit with the culture. Mm-hmm. It must be very tempting for an organization to turn a blind eye when it has an employee that is producing fantastic results but not necessarily behaving in the right way. Yeah. So how do you encourage organizations to deal with that dichotomy?
Yeah, I think for organizations, and typically when we work on culture change, we will work with people teams, HR teams, or C-suite to do that. I think shining a light on behaviors and figuring out how you measure it and feedback and having it trickle through the organization and the life cycle is important. But for me, that has to happen with the manager or the leaders to have those conversations. And one of my beliefs that I've got is that you have tough conversations up front, so that if you have somebody where you say, look, these are the deliverables, service level agreements, quality standards, etc., and also the way we go about it is flag things up early, support people. We do collaborate. Honesty and trust are important because we work in a high risk environment, and this is important in the balance. So if we're able to have those conversations with people, and people value understanding how I do things as well as what I deliver, then if anything, and then they're having regular check-ins and how it's going, and I'm supporting you, then if at any stage and consistently the behaviors aren't working, then we say, okay, well, remember the conversation we had. So we support people with, and it's not necessarily performance management, it's just good leadership. And then leaders should be setting direction, engaging people and monitoring and delivering results with and through people. I think the challenge is, and I'm sure you probably covered this in the leadership podcast, is if somebody hasn't challenged that, and particularly it can be systemic, because it is tough to have those conversations. If somebody hasn't challenged it, that's not fair on the individual, because it might just be a fit or they don't know about it. I think that's really unfair on the other people who have to carry them or know that behavior is happening and they're not doing that behavior. And it's tough on a manager who inherits that and has to deal with it, because inevitably it's, well, I've been doing this for years and nobody's challenged it. So it's really tough. So a lot of the time, as well as culture change, we do a lot of work with leaders individually to help them understand really good people, both leadership and management, to manage those expectations, but to give people, help people understand their natural behaviors, strengths, superpowers, blind spots, and how to operate within there. So that does lead to how you support and develop your leaders and managers to help others deliver this.
Yeah. That's really good, really, really interesting. So my final question, Susie, it's a bit cheeky really, but what are the key things that you think help shape culture, and what are the key things that hinder? So in a way I'm saying, what are the key things that help? And perhaps there's some quick wins in there, and what are the key things that actually you really need to avoid these at all costs, because they're really going to hinder any change that you want to take place?
Okay. That's a goodie. Let me do my best to be succinct on that one, Alex. Okay. And I'm not, I think it would be easy to say, oh, well, this would help, and the absence of that would hinder, and maybe there are some of those. So I think what helps in anything is clarity. So clarity, managing expectations of this is how we do things, and this is where we're heading, either strategically or in change. And there's so much change going on. And I think some honesty around that, instead of saying, oh, it's going to be rosy, it's recognizing if there might be some bumps. So for me, what helps culture change is clarity. I think what also helps it is giving it the right level of support and resource, which might sound obvious, but how are you genuinely going to help people through transition to make sense of it and to bring it to life, and not just putting the values everywhere, but how are you going to support them in doing it, help them let go or understand what this means to them. I think the other thing that, I don't know if it's on your in the help bucket or the hint bucket, but it's something about measurement. And I've always been, I think measurement for me should be things you can quantify and qualify. I'm a great fan of putting hard measures on soft skills, and not from a detrimental way, but we can't just measure people based on results, deliverables, outcomes and outputs. I think contribution, somebody, what they bring in their invisible rucksack, their behaviors. I think how you're going to measure culture. How do you know this culture is working? How do you know people are engaged in it and delivering? How do you know what they think of it? So I think probably it's more in the absence bucket, is if you don't measure things and if you don't look at what might be tripping you up, particularly in some of your policies or some of maybe the people in senior roles that should be leading by example and not leading by example. So I think, looking at those things, because that will undermine your messaging and also how you put it into practice. So I think look at what might trip you up, and but it's really about giving it enough, getting clarity, giving it enough time and attention, and also weaving it in so that it becomes part of the fabric, not some sort of bolt on, so that it's systemic, that it is. And if you say, for example, simplicity as a goal, and then you have a 20-page printed employee handbook with a 5-page policy on how to ask for annual leave, then for me that's a bit of a contradiction. So work out what might be getting in the way, but as always, with clarity and a bit of measurement, managing expectations, giving people a voice, those are absolutely going to help you on your way.
So interesting, Susie. That has been absolutely fantastic. It's so interesting, and I could tell you're so passionate about it. It really comes across, and that's just great, because it's a topic that it's not something you can achieve overnight, and to really understand some ways that companies can go around this, some opportunities they have, how PRISM can help. I just think it's just been really enlightening. So thank you ever so much indeed.
No, that is my pleasure. And I think it's, out of all the projects we get involved in, and for people, it's tough wherever you are. It's quite a tough one. So any way that we can help or give some insights, then it's been a great conversation. And as you can probably tell, I could speak for hours on this. So it's something I am passionate about.
Well, that's lovely. Really, really good. Thank you ever so much indeed. And we'll catch up again soon, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. And you, great to talk to you.
And
thanks
to
a
you.
lot.
Thanks.
This podcast was brought to you by PRISM Brain Mapping, where we believe that self-awareness is key to the success of every individual, and that successful people drive business success. Contact us for more information at prismbrainmapping.com.